Welcome back. Okay, so there's 3 more realms to explore. The next one's the interpersonal realm. This was the yellow one. People skills. So this is the promo for it. It makes sense. If you're good at people skills, you will have more effective networks. And we hear about the importance of networking. It can't be underestimated. If you have a big network of personal and professional contacts, life becomes a whole lot easier. You have more supports to fall back on. There's more sources of referrals and work. There's not many downsides to an effective network. People who are high in this realm, allow you to read that, high and low. You may know people who fit onto both sides of the spectrum. Okay, so the 3 components. The first one is the interpersonal relationships, the ability to establish and maintain mutually satisfying relationships that are importantly characterised by give and take. Sometimes relationships are satisfying to one person and not both, so it's an important dimension that they're mutually satisfying. This is supported by an attitude, and the person who is high in this, they often come with a high degree of curiosity and interest in other people, so that they're willing to give time and invest in developing these relationships, so to listen and to be present to other people. Take Colin. So this is a changed name, but a solicitor I worked with who was a very competent solicitor, extremely competent, so had all the IQ that you'd need as a good solicitor, but he used to cut the most extraordinary corners, and the client had particular processes that need to be followed, and he didn't follow them, and he got the job done, but not in the way the client really wanted. And he was also extraordinarily high in this domain, in my view. He had this amazing capacity to form relationships with people. He got away with murder. He got away with stuff as a solicitor that no one else would get away with because he had this relationship to fall back on. And there was times when he would make a mistake and he was forgiven effortlessly. I think this is one of those domains, if you can establish it with your clients, these good relationships, it will help you in your practice in unanticipated ways. Empathy is the next, the ability to be aware of and understand and appreciate the thoughts and feelings of others. So this is walking in their shoes. It's not sympathy. It's not blending your emotional life with theirs. It's maintaining your own centre, but noticing and acknowledging that someone has a different experience than you, noticing what that is and valuing it. That's what empathy is, walking in their shoes and seeing it from their perspective. This is extraordinarily important as a lawyer if you're involved in negotiation, mediation, alternative dispute resolution. I was talking to someone during the break. To understand where somebody is coming from gives you a far greater capacity to negotiate effectively with them. And I was reminded of Dale Carnegie's work, thank you, of winning friends and influencing people. One of these is empathy underpins a lot of his approach. Yeah. So if you're able to go into a negotiation, not give ground, and whether it's a negotiation on law or an interpersonal basis, negotiate with your partners and other colleagues all the time, to maintain your assertive position, but to understand where they're coming from, it's far easier to find the common ground you need to move forward. So empathy is a very useful skill to develop. Social responsibility is the desire and ability to contribute towards society or your profession and tune into the welfare of others. It is a pathway to a meaningful life, to be able to align your, like with the self-actualisation component, to be able to not just be self-actualised in terms of your own ambitions, but to be interested and care about the ambitions of other people and the needs of other people. They're closely related. People who are high in this often will be volunteering on committees, will be doing board work, will be taking interest over and above their practice into the profession as a whole. And you will all know people who are doing this. Usually they would score high on this. They're taking responsibility beyond themselves to the needs of others. They're important as well. While people who are high in this and pursue these activities don't do it for their own gain, there is often gain involved. It helps to contribute towards the network, which at the beginning of this realm, one of the benefits of being high in this realm is that you have a strong network. People who are high in social responsibility will often have a very strong network, although that's not what motivates them. The decision-making realms, this is the fourth of the 5 realms. This should be a realm that is familiar in a cognitive level to lawyers. It's the ability to use emotions in the best way that helps solve problems. So we are problem solvers, what lawyers are employed to do. So people who are high in this realm in emotional intelligence would usually have that confidence in their ability to find a solution to a sticky emotional situation. They will know a way to work through it. They can solve problems where emotions are involved. They're not overwhelmed by them as much as someone who isn't competent in this. Again, the high and low in this realm. I'll give you a second to read it. Components. The first one is reality testing. The ability to assess whether the way you see the world is actually the way it is. You'll all be familiar with cognitive biases that help and infect our thinking. They help our thinking because it means we're far more efficient in navigating the world. They infect our thinking because it can interfere with the accuracy that we're able to perceive external information. So things like rose-coloured glasses, if you've heard of that, it's an inaccurate assessment of the past. Halo effect, if you've heard of that, where if you like someone, everything they do is good, even if it's not. Or the horns effect, if you don't like someone, everything they do is bad, whether that's real or not. These biases are automatic to us. People who are high in this skill are aware of that and compensate for it. So they're always testing whether what they're seeing is actually real, whether there is evidence to support what they're assuming to be correct. They're always testing the reality of the way they're seeing the world. They're not hijacked by the biases that come automatically to all of us. The problem-solving domain is the ability to find solutions to problems where emotions are involved. So this is where you're aware of the impact that anxiety and your emotional life, the impact it has on your capacity to think clearly. So are you able to still engage in problem solving despite high emotions? So when you're stressed, particularly when there's heightened emotion, it's not always stress, sometimes excitement can make problem solving difficult as well, but how well can you integrate and use that information so that you're able to still do what you're trained to do as lawyers, which is think clearly and solve problems in a logical way. So how does the emotions fit into that process for you? Sometimes, an example of where I've seen this, actually heard about this rather than saw it myself, I heard it from a distance in a coaching environment, where someone was in a mediation and they were representing a client they had a lot of connection with, and the client got angry. They were getting very angry, and it was very difficult for the solicitor to separate themselves from their own sympathetic anger that seemed to, they got hooked into the client's story. and it became very hard for them to separate themselves from their anger that they also felt at the client's situation and continue to think clearly. So instead of using that anger to clarify their thinking, the anger distorted it even more. Impulse control is the capacity to resist following whatever impulse occurs to you, resisting the temptation to act. There's a really fascinating test called the marshmallow test that was done on 4-year-olds, where a group of 4-year-olds were given a marshmallow and they were put into a room and they were told, if you eat that marshmallow, if you just eat the marshmallow, you walk away and you can have that marshmallow. But if you resist eating that marshmallow, I'll give you 10 more. So they were timed, had to go 2 minutes or something like that. And the children who were able to resist eating the marshmallow, so control their impulse to eat the marshmallow and wait for their reward, were followed longitudinally for, I think it was 10 years. And the results were extraordinary and a bit frightening. But it was found that those kids who were able to exercise impulse control at such an early age were found to have long-term benefits in terms of health, in terms of success at school, in terms of forming relationships. And it was a study that taught people that impulse control and not being in a reactive space so that you're responding to the impulses, not being driven by them, can be a very powerful tool to adapt to the world, to make choices rather than continually react to what's coming at you. So it's a very powerful thing, and the groundwork is laid in early childhood. So stress management is really about resilience. How well can you tolerate stress? What does stress do to you? How do you incorporate new impulses? Does it turn up the stress too much so that it interferes with your performance? Stress management is strongly associated with resilience. Resilience doesn't mean you don't feel stress. Resilience means you bounce back from it. So if you're a resilient person, you can cope better with stress, but you still experience the similar stresses to everybody else. High and low. This is a familiar concept for many people. You kind of know what resilience is, because there's been moments of it in your life and there's moments of low resilience as well. The 3 components of this are in this measure of emotional intelligence. Resilience is a big field all on its own, and there are different ways of measuring it. But in this model that I'm presenting today from Baron, it says flexibility is one of the skills that you need to develop. What is flexibility? It is the ability to adjust your emotions and thoughts to changing situations. So that you're very deliberate about what you do when faced with new information. So you think about change in a way that is adaptive and adaptive to the environment. So how would that play out in the legal practice? You might find in the case of litigation, and I know this, things change very suddenly. You suddenly get a piece of evidence that changes the entire strategy and advice you would otherwise given on a case. And perhaps that evidence was even foreseeable from you and you missed it. So there's a sudden change that taps into some emotional level. Someone who is high on flexibility would be able to shift gears and directions far more quickly than someone who is low, so that they are able to incorporate the new information and adapt to it very fast. Someone who's low on this is stuck on the road they started on, and they get thrown very easily by change, whether it's to facts or environment. Stress tolerance almost speaks for itself, the ability to withstand stressful events without developing symptoms, emotional or physical symptoms. So coping with stress, tolerating stress. There's a whole range of coping strategies that are useful in coping with stress, and there are a whole range of coping strategies that are not useful. Someone who is high in stress tolerance would be using coping strategies that are adaptive rather than not. So an example of a non-adaptive coping strategy is having a glass of wine after work, which I have done before. An adaptive coping strategy, so it is problem solving, so that you get ahead of it and try to solve the problem so it doesn't happen again, or you take control over it. But there's a whole, in terms of the interventions to improve it, it's a very complex area. Optimism is an interesting one for lawyers because many lawyers are not optimists. There's many research studies to show that if you didn't start as a pessimist, you probably were trained to be one by the time you finished law school or a couple of years in practice. Optimism is not about happy thinking. It is about accurate thinking. It is about looking at events when things go wrong. And there's 3 domains of measuring it. Do you say the cause of those events, the cause of things going wrong, are caused by you, or are they caused by something external? Pessimists would tend to say, I'm at fault because things go wrong. It's not somebody else. Interestingly, pessimists, if things go right, would say it's luck. It doesn't get flipped around. So there's 3 ways of measuring optimism and pessimism. Pessimists would tend to have pervasive beliefs, so things have gone wrong and that cause is pervasive, so it's everything has gone wrong. It's not just this situation, it's everything. It's permanent, so it's not just now, but it's going to always be like this. And it's personal, so it's all me. It's my fault. I did this, it's because I'm a bad person, it's always going to be this way. That's a typical pessimistic response. An optimistic response to things going wrong is that I may have played a role, but it wasn't all me. It was very specific to this situation, so it was specific, and it's not going to last for long. So it's temporary, it's specific to the situation, and it's not personal. It's the flip. I see this playing out when I do BD with business development with some barristers, and they've had coffees and taken control of their practice, and they turn around and it's successful. And I say, well done on your work. It's luck. It's like, you pessimist. But it plays out. So, another 3-minute pause, micro break, just so you process this with the person you worked with last time. Then I'm going to finish with a few ideas or a structure for intervention if you want to change this. I won't have time to go through it all. So I will call you back to order in 3 minutes. Go. Any one of those questions, whatever resonates with you. I've been challenged during the break to, all very well, but where to from here? As I said, an hour isn't long enough for me to cover the whole model and interventions, but I want to give you something to go away with in terms of what do you do if you want to improve or increase your skills around emotional intelligence. Each dimension has different interventions, but many of the interventions that are linked with them rely on the work of Albert Ellis, the smiling assassin you saw at the beginning, the cheesy smile, but cognitive behavioural therapy. And when you hear therapy, you'll think, oh, there's something wrong with me. CBT is based on an understanding, while it's used in a therapeutic context, I use it all the time in executive coaching. So it is about how you control the interaction between your thoughts, your feelings and your behaviour. That's what it is. It's relevant to high functioning, good to great end of the population as well as the clinical end. So it's used in both. We hear more about it in the clinical end. A lot of the interventions to build your emotional competence is around tuning into what your thoughts are. You might be aware of your emotional response, but you need to trace back your emotional response to the thinking that underpins it. So the interventions are finding and becoming aware of the thinking that is driving this emotional reaction or this emotional response or the behaviour that's associated with the competence. What is the thinking that you're employing, and is it accurate? Is it helpful to you? Is it aligned with where you want to go? And challenging it. So this model, which Albert Ellis was, when I mentioned him, rational emotive therapy, he found that what you think then drives your behaviour, then drives your emotion, then drives your behaviour, which reinforces what you think. And this cycle happens unconsciously, not more subconsciously rather than unconsciously. It's like the thinking that underpins your day runs through your day like a ticker tape that you can dip into if you want to, but most of the time we don't. We just exist at the level of behaviours and emotions. And rarely do we notice that when you stop at a red light, do you notice a thought, this is the 10th red light that I've stopped at. You know, the world's out to get me. Or I'm so unlucky. You know, these thoughts that run through your day as you're driving up to that red light that can change your entire attitude to the light changing red again. Or when I was coming out today at 6:15 this morning, it was raining, pouring. The thoughts I had weren't very adaptive. And you're not aware of them. It's only until you tune into the thinking and you employ the skills that you've been trained in as lawyers, which is weighing up the evidence, thinking through the alternatives, choosing the most logical or likely outcome. These skills that you bring to your profession every day, you bring to the thinking that underpins your daily life. So I think many lawyers are good at that step. What's hard to do is to tune into the thinking, to pause long enough to become aware of what those thoughts are that are driving the behaviours and the emotions. So in terms of an intervention, ants. Ants. If you walk away with anything, think of the ants. What are they? The automatic negative thoughts that run through your day. Your job is to get the Mortein out and kill the ants. So these automatic negative, unhelpful thoughts, like the world is against me because the light has turned red, it's an ant. Because what the thought is there, the light should be green. It's not very logical. I should get a good run into the city. Yeah? These are the ants that can affect your emotional experience. So the way you spot ants, the ant trails, are words that you say to yourself like should and never and always and must. If you can tune into your thoughts and spot any of those words, you're on the ant trail. Because it's pretty rare that anything is a should. There's not many shoulds in the world. We should on ourselves from a great height a lot of the time. And it's not very accurate. Musts, there aren't that many musts that are true. If you want to get to the truth, there's mostly about choice, not must. Yet we drive ourselves with musts, and then that drives our emotional response. Always, things are rarely always anything. Never, things are rarely never. So you're trying to move from extreme thoughts, good or bad, to something much more accurate and aligned with reality. So that's an intervention in EQ in a 2.5 minute nutshell. There is obviously a lot more to that. What I would suggest in terms of further reading, and thank you again for the suggestion, Martin Seligman has written extensively on building resilience through positive psych, which is there's a range of his books around which looks at optimism in particular. He started as a researcher on optimism. He's a very mainstream, well-established psychologist. Has anyone heard of Seligman's work? Yeah. His books are very accessible. As someone who's a pure academic, his books are very well written, easily understood. So anything by Seligman is great. Probably the most recent that's useful on resilience building, and so on building emotional intelligence too, a lot of overlap, is the book of Flourish. Is that the, yeah? And there's also readings that have emerged from Geelong Grammar where he started a program on building emotional competence And what was the other university you mentioned? St Paul's, Sydney. Thank you. So he's done work from St Paul's, Sydney, so you might see some publications from there as well. But a good starting place is the work on Flourish by Martin Seligman. There are many others, but if you're interested, send me an email and I'll shoot them through to you that are more tailored to your specific needs. So, that's me. I really didn't mean to put that. I meant to put, do you want questions? I'm happy to take, it is 10 to 9. It's meant to finish at quarter to. I'm happy to take one or two questions, or I'll be hanging around for a bit afterwards. Oh.
When you look at the sheet that you had,
yeah.
How accurate would you be about yourself?
Well, that's a question of how emotionally intelligent you are in self-awareness. Look, it's a starting place, isn't it? So your experience of yourself is a good place to start, and then you're looking for feedback from the environment. But being self-aware, the building block to building your emotional intelligence is to start with that, even if it's not accurate. Work with the theories that come from it. Yeah. Okay, so it's time to end. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be here for another 10 minutes, so I can chat to anyone who wants to follow anything up, and my email's there if you want to email me for further resources. But thanks so much for your attention this morning.
Thank you.